Well, thank you very much, and delighted to be with you this afternoon. Sorry I couldn't be there in person. As you just heard, I'm going to talk a bit about story and climate for nature recovery. And actually, the presentation by President Hattler Thomas Dottier this morning was a superb introduction, really, talking about hope, courage, agency, and intent. And I thought that was all kind of setting the scene really nicely for thinking about what we are trying to do and how we're trying to kind of make it happen. So let me just take you through a little kind of a set of issues and questions, two questions really to start with. Um, how do we talk about climate, nature, and social inequality crises without causing more anxiety? It's easy to cause anxiety, to say how bad things are, but how do we talk about these things in a way that leads to agency? So, my second question is, how do we make these good things happen with intent? How do we, in short, create a kind of age of abundance as we read in the story of Gudrun, in the saga of Laxerdale? And this is where she is buried at Helgafell. So that particular saga is all about extremely abundant nature and farming, and it tells us a kind of baseline of what we might try to seek again in the future. And that's one of the things that story can do. It also deals with the difficult times. In 1939, Bertolt Brecht, the librettist and writer, said this. He said, "In the dark times, will there be singing?" And he also said, "Yes, there will also be singing about the dark times." So we may feel that we're in dark times and it's really difficult to be celebratory, to come together, to try to achieve good things when we're faced with so much that's bad. But Brecht was in the very dark times in 1939. And this then is our challenge when it comes to story, is thinking about how we use language and ideas and concepts to bring people together to achieve with intent that courage and that agency that the president was talking about this morning. Traditional story starts here. It starts at the fireplace, around the hearth, after food. In all human cultures, this has been a common theme. At the end of the day, people come together, the children are wide eyed, faces upturned, the shadows are beyond us. In the shadows, demons and horrors and things we don't understand, but we're brought together by the fireplace. The famed Navajo Diné storyteller Hugh Yellowman in the 1960s, he said this. He said, "If children hear stories, they'll grow up to be good people. If adults hear stories, they'll know what to do." And there's that link then again between words and action, words and intent, and that action then being something collective that gives us a kind of sense of what we might be able to do. All traditional story has three components that I'd just like to draw attention to. In every place in the world where we've looked at the forms of storytelling, the locations, the people, the content, we find these three things. There's always moral content. There's something in the story that tells us about right and wrong. And it doesn't involve an explanation and data. It says through people's actions, it becomes very clear what we think is the right approach and what we would say is the wrong approach. So the moral content, number one. Number two, there's instructions for living. There's something about how to live well in the future. And thirdly, there are patterns and moments of transformation when everything changes. A click, a ratchet point, something happens and the whole world changes. A threshold, a tipping point, we might call it these days as well. Our lives are full of these sorts of transformational moments, and stories do that as well. So when we hear about them, we recognize them because we think that's just like my life. That's just like going from small school to big school, or going from college to a job, or losing a friend, or getting married, or having a baby, or retiring. These are all big transformation moments for us all. Now, the oldest surviving written story is written in cuneiform, as we see on the right-hand side of the picture as I'm looking at it. I hope it's that way, but it's the clay tablet um, that has the writing of the Epic of Gilgamesh written on that cuneiform tablet, clay tablet. On the other side, ink on vellum. These are Icelandic sagas from Reykjavik. Um, this is partly how our stories survive. We write them down, we tell them to other people, and their power is transferred across the generations. And a challenge that I would like to pose, and I raise in talks about story, is to say, how do we create stories that will last for 1,000 years? They're so powerful. They contain such emotional content and such connection that they'll last for 1,000 years. The Gilgamesh story has lasted 5,000 years. The sagas of Iceland for 1,000 so far. So let me just pick on three stories, if I may. Let's go to the Epic of Gilgamesh, 5,000 years ago from Uruk in the lands between the two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates in Mesopotamia, a despot king. He goes on a journey. He kills the forest spirit. He kills the last of the winged bulls. He's deeply unhappy. He's in a hole. And what he comes back to at the end of the story is a realization that the thing he can do is transform the city of Uruk into a blue-green paradise by piping in water and building common places for people to meet and orchards and wild places and transforming the city. And that becomes his legacy. He's in a hole, he gets out of the hole. And that's a common theme of story. Secondly, let me draw attention to one that's 1,000 years old, a set of stories that are 1,000 years old. There are 1,001 Nights, sometimes called the Arabian Nights, Alf Layla wa Layla, which means there are 1,001 nights. Here we're set in the city of Aleppo, the city of 54 souks, coffee houses for storytelling, great traditions of discussion and words and language and story. Another empire, another terrible king, a story of how a girl tells stories and saves people's lives. The king, Shahryar, when he takes each new queen at her first dawn, each queen is killed. And so Scheherazade, who becomes the hero of the story, she says, I'll do it. And she starts telling stories that last all night and leaves the story on a cliffhanger at dawn. The, the story hasn't finished, and the king wants to know what's happened. And she, in a sense, has invented the soap opera because she says, no, you'll have to wait till tomorrow to hear the rest of the story. And that's how she builds the stories. And she does this for 1,001 nights. Amazing creativity, learnt from writing and talking and hearing oral stories from other people. And in the souks, they whisper, she has saved our lives. She has saved our families. Third story, Cinderella, the story of Cinderella, the ash girl, the girl who lives by the fireplace, who comes upon a magic moment when the magic is passed on to her and she goes through the glass slipper that we see her holding there on her foot. She goes on a journey from rags to riches. She's in a hole, she gets out of a hole. And That pattern of rags to riches has made the story of Cinderella the most famous story in the whole world. There are 700 different language versions of Cinderella. It's rags to riches, and everyone gets it without explanation. We hear the story and we think, oh, yeah, I get it. She was in a poor place and then she came into a good place. That's why the story connects. And the Ash girl and the Ash boy is, of course, a famous trope in many stories. In the sagas too, Grettir was an ash boy at Bjark, here on the top left. And he goes, his life is up, down, down, up, down, up, down throughout his life. And he ends up on Dranki, where he's finally killed just before he was about to be released. But he starts as an ash boy, and his pattern of life is this up down one across the whole of his life. And that's one of the reasons why it's so powerful as a story, is it gets our attention. Kurt Vonnegut said this. They said the shape of stories is falling in a hole and getting out of a hole. And he produced this charming video, which is still, he didn't produce it, but there's a charming video of him doing this chalkboard pattern of stories, the fall and rise and the rise and fall. You can look at that on YouTube. It's great. And he said about Cinderella, people love that story. They never get sick of it. And that's why it's so popular. So that's a challenge for us all when talking about climate, nature, social equality crises, and our actions to do something about it. How can we create story that people never get sick of? They understand what we're trying to do. So final couple of thoughts then. Story is all about transformation, about social and personal transformations. And that too is a kind of challenge. We're in a hole, we get out of a hole. A pebble strikes your window at midnight. Oh no, you think, what now? One way or another, your life is just about to change. And that's what story is all about. A moment that after which there's a ratchet and everything changes. And there's intent too. So let me give two quick examples. This is a story about tipping points. I don't know whether you remember these three types of mobile phones, cell phones, as they're also called. In 2007, these three companies, BlackBerry, Motorola, and Nokia, had 98% of the world market in 2007. In that same year, somebody invents, this is where if I was with you, I'd pause a little bit and ask for ideas, but someone invents the smartphone. And those three companies say, oh, that's going to disappear. We're the masters of the universe. We're in control. Within 5 years, the smartphone has taken over, and these three companies have 3% of the world market. They're finished. So technology sometimes can lead to this sudden change. But of course, there was this intent in the background, the long kind of ecosystem of development of the technology. They could have changed, but they didn't want to. So they died, the three companies, effectively. Okay, here's a clue. The president also talked about this topic this morning, as it happens. Here are 7 countries of the world. Again, I would ask you, what is it that links them together? Well, you know what the one at the top in the north is, but over on this side, Norway, Albania, over here, Bhutan, around the world, Costa Rica, Paraguay, Uruguay. My question to you would be to say, what is it that links those 7 countries? Well, the clue was this morning. All of those countries have almost 100% of their electricity systems are from renewables. Different sources, different ways of doing it, but they all have created electricity systems, you included in Iceland, as we heard about, that are 100% almost renewable. This was no accident. This happened with intent. And story does that same thing. It happens with intent. So let me finish then by saying, giving you two quotes. Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, the French pilot and writer, he said, if you want to build a ship, don't ask people to gather wood. Tell them to long for the endless immensity of the sea. So story should make our eyes go far and not think about the hard work it is to do something. It needs to inspire. And Ursula Le Guin said, imagination is subversive, because you know what we're going to do with story? We're going to change the world. And that is, in a sense, a subversive form of language. And that, I think, is what we're going to need. So here are some resources for story. If you want to access these things quickly, you could take a picture of that slide. You'll find a link to my YouTube channel, which has 25 films about climate and nature recovery at Jules Pretty 58. Some resources on my website about what makes good story and my climate chronicles. And coming in the summer, a new podcast called Heat, Camera, Action, how people are taking action to solve the climate and nature recovery. So jump onto the YouTube channel, just click subscribe, it's free. And you'll find some, I hope, some interesting resources there that will help you in your journeys towards sustainability. Thank you very much indeed, everybody.